Dan, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you back.
Thanks, Mark. Great to be here.
We've done a number of Facebook Lives in the past, but the first time we've done one of these on YouTube, we had some great discussions in the past. We've had a few times where the Wi-Fi has been a problem and Dan's taken over as well, but hopefully that won't happen today. But this one today, it's interesting because myself and Dan probably connected a year or so ago, maybe a bit longer, connecting in a similar community, learning this work of healing, self-regulation, self-awareness. And we've gone down a similar path in our time since. We've gone more towards into that leadership, that corporate environment, business success, and bringing what we've learned, the inner work, into the external and helping people in similar situations that are leading teams, building businesses. And just looking at what Dan's doing today, something really struck me as being a powerful conversation we could have, which is, I've called it leading beyond logic, the role of intuition in business success, which I think is really interesting because I've never heard of intuition being talked about in various leadership trainings that I've done, entrepreneurs, communities. Intuition is not talked about very much. I thought we could really delve into that. How can we ultimately build our teams from intuition? How can we lead them from a place of intuition? How can we create sustainable success from a place of intuition? So let's delve into it, Dan. What does that bring up for you when we talk about the role of intuition in business success?
Do we even allow intuition into the
I don't think
workplace?
so. 20 years in advertising, I can tell you nobody talked about intuition. That's for sure.
I mean, gut feel works in sports. It works in a lot of other things, but even in the performative culture of corporate, if you have somebody on your team who's intuitive, that's great, but they better have read the materials and know which way the company's going. And I think it's more instinct that business culture and mindset and everything performative about, getting everybody on board and that culture of, excellence and moving forward. I think it's honing instinct more than it is honing intuition. So what would intuition look like in business? I think people burn out because they're in the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn of instinct and survival skills. So we've turned corporate into a game. It's gamified now. So I don't even know if we live in intuition. So that's what it brings up for me.
It's such a good point. And this is something we talked about just before we went live, is this... I kind of exist in a different world now, but I'm thinking back to as I said, 20 years in advertising, leading teams, sort of medium-sized teams, and it struck me that everybody was in this fight or flight mode. It was like everybody's trying to get everything done as quickly as possible, trying to please the client, trying to get the work out, working late, and there was no space for any intuition or presence. I would say there's a big difference between what I call managers and leaders, and it was everyone there was like managers, basically, me included. I wasn't doing any leading. I was just kind of basically firefighting, do my best to manage the workloads and do one-to-ones and keep everybody happy. And just generally, we've got our backs against the wall and we're just churning out the work as quickly as we can so we don't miss deadlines. And so everybody is in this, like you said, fight or flight mode, being basically we're existing in the head consciousness, which is the intellect, basically.
Yeah.
And nobody's got any time to actually feel into what's happening in their system. And as a result, as we talk about on this podcast quite a lot, if you're existing in the head, which is where most of humanity is, there's no healing, there's no processing going on within the body. So energy, stress is just building up and up and up. Nobody's pausing, nobody's stopping, nobody's feeling into what's happening. And that energy then, it doesn't go away. People are going home in the evening. They're drinking coffee during the day to keep themselves going. They're drinking wine in the evenings to try and decompress a bit. And then they're struggling to sleep. And then back in you go, back into the fight or flight you go again the next day. And as a result, because there's no awareness of the body, there's no processing going on. So this energy is building up and up and up and up. And eventually you hear someone in the team who's having to take extended leave because they're burnt out, basically, and they hit their limit. So that basically seems to me what the traditional corporate environment has become, this kind of just this massive just fight or flight, as you said. So how do you then, what's your process for going into an environment like that? And what kind of processes, what practices are you able to bring into that? Are they open to it even?
Yeah, I can tell you, well, my perspective on that, while I was in corporate and I left about 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago to start my business, I would say that it would play in the world of servant leadership. So you talk about being a servant leader and people finding their passion and trying to bring more passion projects into things, which is more of a
Mm,
below the neck feel. So when I was in corporate, it would be, find your purpose, find your spot in the
mm,
company, get your people. So you'd make this little pod of safety in, human interactions of below the neck. And then you'd all go in and you'd battle like a team, against the latest corporate culture change or the latest corporate, like this company merges with that company and now they have a new set of values. And are we aligned with those values? So I would
mm,
say it would be like before work, at lunch, and after work. You're doing it as doses of healing during the day, as opposed to how it
mm,
integrates in with the workflow. I had a big culture change when I went from waterfall development and software, you know, more of a performative building, how much faster, how much, can you beat the clock type of environment, very fight or flight, very intense,
mm,
to agile, which is an inspect and adapt. And the inspect and adapt of building and building smaller pieces and sprints, I think helps people in a culture of people first is one of
mm,
the Scrum values. So the people first aspect of it, it gives you a little bit more below the neck. But again, the people that succeed are the ones who are the high thinkers. So you have the predilection towards, um, an environment where you're going to have, um, like high thinking, high organization, high projects, structure, and it brings people more up into the head for deadlines and everything else in the fight or flight. But at least the agile culture gets you below the neck in terms of awareness, in terms of estimation. So you're recalibrating what's going to be done every week, and that takes the pressure off. Again, though, it's more of a during the day, a little bit during the day. So um, it's just a there. I don't know that there are places in corporate other than starting your own business where you sit with what you're going to do in your purpose all day. You sit below the neck and
mm.
you're always checking in with the heart space. Is this a heck yes or a heck no for me?
Yes.
Is that you really check in with the gut, you check in with the sacral. That there's no space for that, and there's certainly no
Mm,
teaching for that. You get it by accident if you get it at all. Is really really my answer as far as intuition. But the rest of it is, if you're instinctive and you're fast, you got to be the jaguar, right?
mm. It's so true. I mean, that was my experience of corporate. Like I said, it's like a project manager is delivering you the work, and your job is to get your head around it and push it out as quickly as possible. And that environment, I don't know, but I hope that that environment can evolve. Like you said, I've been on another podcast where I talked about this. Imagine a brief comes in and you sit together as a team before anybody says anything, and you just co-regulate as a team. Like nobody says anything. You drop
Yeah,
awareness into your bodies and you just feel into the support that's around you. And so when you actually then do speak about this brief or project, whatever it is, you're coming from a regulated place. But the problem is, like, everyone's dysregulated. It's coming from the top down. So you're getting dysregulation from the board, from the business owners. That's coming down to team managers. That's coming down to the team. And so everybody's dysregulated. There's no presence. There's no stillness. And so um, the work is just being done in a co-regulated place. So everyone, I get the feeling that nobody's doing the best job possible, and everybody is on the edge of a burnout, basically. So I think it's got to come from the top first. But I think the issue is that it is this time, in my experience, the time pressure. That everybody thinks that we've got to do this, we've got a deadline. The idea of actually sitting and co-regulating for 10 minutes before we do this meeting seems like a waste of time to people in that environment. So I think there is a lot of re-education that would need to go on for that to be something that could come into a busy corporate environment, for example.
Yeah. And everything's a commitment. Everything is a goal. Everything is, success or failure, and failure is death. So even, and what you use to solve it is above the neck. It's like everything that you've been trained in school, the new courses you're taking, the podcasts you're listening to, everything is just head, solve from the head. So if you, I can't imagine what it'd be like to go into a scrum in corporate just out of the blue and say, we're going to meditate for the first 15 minutes. People will be like, yeah, I'm going to sit at my desk and finish email. I'm 15 minutes behind. We're not doing this. People come in 5 minutes late every time just because the first 5 minutes is people talking, which is a form of, energetic connection and regulation. But, there's the 5 minute past and leave 5 minute early crowd for meetings too. And that's just got to keep going, got to keep the momentum up, got to do Pomodoro blocks, got to make sure, I'm focused when I'm doing everything, go. The next, every mindset book is about optimization and efficiency and how do I meet today's pace of tools. We're not designed to work this quickly.
No.
And I'm not suggesting we fling our wooden shoes into the machine, because the work needs to get done. So I've found success in corporate with managers who understand there's a both and take the people first and give space for that. If you don't need to show up at the meeting, you don't have to. Just get the work done in a different way. And some managers tolerate that and some don't. But I love the idea of like what I'm sort of looking at is intuition and motion. It's positionally, we talk about mindset being success or failure, or getting work done being this is where you need to be today, this is where we need to be tomorrow. It's a very positional thing. And then the instinct is, how do I get to A to B? So you work on the killer instinct of how do I define be better, how do I communicate be better, where everyone's going, how do I get everyone pointed at B? And those are the focus. What if instead of that, we just allowed everyone's best skills to take over and drop in and say, what if I look at my to-do list, what are my have to do's, must do's, and get to do's, but not get to do for yourself, but get to do for the company? What is the biggest opportunity here? So the most successful people in the C-suite are the ones who naturally have an instinct for finding that. Whereas most people who have their heads down and working above the neck, they're working on, okay, what did he say? What do I need to do? So again, it's this instinct versus intuition, and how do we allow intuition to flow that hits everyone's control center, which creates a control center issue for most of management. If I've got everybody working on their intuition and doing what they think they should do, in Agile, that's more of a light scrum. But it turns to dark scrum very quickly because management needs to take control. So they put processes in place to make sure it's great that you're all swimming in this nice little, directional way of creating things. But I need that button on my desktop by tomorrow morning because I have to show it to a client. So you don't go too far. I still have to control this. So there's this mix and this play.
There's always a balance, isn't there, between, it's not to say that because I think a lot of people I've spoken to on this kind of more spiritual path, it's like, oh, we have to silence the mind. The intellect is a bad thing. Whereas always I'm at pains to always say that it's a balance between the two. You don't necessarily want one or the other. You couldn't turn off the intellect even if you wanted to. And I think that's actually more ego, that kind of thought path. But it really is having that balance between the masculine and feminine energies, if you like, that balance between head and heart. But
Yeah.
as you say, in most work environments, it is all in that masculine doing energy, and there's no space for being. Um, I'm just thinking now, if somebody's listening to this and they're like, I mean, it's different. I guess in what we do, I guess you might say the same, Dan. I've kind of removed myself to a large degree from that world now because it just didn't work for me. So I decided I'm going to have to build my own thing, basically, that allows me to work from home, and I can, whenever I need it, I can just drop into my system, ask for support, have someone sit with me. And the most powerful practice that I've integrated into my life, and I would recommend to anybody, really is at the end of each day, I will reach out to my community and we will just sit together in presence, on Zoom. We don't have to be physically present. Energy works beyond time and space. So me and Dan are opposite sides of the world here. And if we drop into our hearts, into our bodies, our systems will naturally start to co-regulate. But basically, for me, it feels like a battery recharging, basically, which I always do at the end of each day. Because even if I've had a good day, because I've been in my head for the most part, there'll be energy that's got stuck and trapped in my system. So I just need that time at the end of the day, just 15 minutes, feel through my body and allow that energy to start processing out my system. Interesting, some stats that I tend to bring up quite often about workplace environments. This is a study by Gallup that I think interviewed something like 2 million people around the world. They found that up to 79% of people feel disengaged by the work that they do, and 2/3 aren't thriving in terms of well-being. I bring that up because it is a bigger issue, a global issue, really, of people just not thriving in their work environments. I'm just thinking, so you touched on something quite interesting, which is a theme that I bring up in my work and on this podcast, which is around purpose. If somebody is in a work environment like that, feeling disengaged in what they're doing, struggling in terms of their well-being, what would you advise them if they don't feel like have much purpose in their work right now, in the work that they're doing in the company that they're working for? Do you have any advice for somebody who is in that kind of situation? Because that's where I was about 6 years ago.
I wonder, when you're in that environment, there's a certain homeostasis and expectation and magnetism that gets built into your life where you may not realize it, but you're attracting that same stuff at home too. Your natural state is in competition with yourself, with your work, and then that just turns into competition with every relationship. It's how you engage. So I would, if I'm advising someone who comes to me and says, I have this problem at work, it's the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. Check in with your other relationships in your life. You walk into a grocery store. How do you view people? How do you view yourself? Do you carry shame with you? Just questions more than advice. Here, take this question with you today and see if this is true for you, because it allows awareness to shift out of the safety of the regular. This is why battered spouses stay in crappy relationships. That was my experience. I had work which was regulated in the sense of a controlled environment, so I could find safety in the control. There are lots of different ways to get to it. I don't think there's a right or wrong. It's really, the advice would be inquiry and self-inquiry. And where can you find love for that would be a practice. Can you love the fact that you're dysregulated? Can you, and maybe not even understand it, because the head is what's driving keeping you in the survival skills of the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And you've built your patterns around those. You're probably fawning a lot in that situation. You're not being your true self. You're not finding your purpose because it's not safe to. So what does safety mean for you would be a question. It's a whole topic, right? Like I could think of about 30 or 40 questions along those lines to just gently bring awareness below the neck. Accepting how you're showing up in the world is okay. That's a whole thing. If you want to trigger people, that's a great way to do it. They get into the not enoughness of their childhood almost immediately when you start probing there. I would just say, where can you not be love and light? Because again, that's performative. Where can you find the love and light that already exists? Where can you place subtle awareness on your being and how your being is being reflected off the things in your day, whether it's at work or at home.
Wow, that's a powerful inquiry. Yeah, that's a great point, actually, isn't it? Because the tendency is to, oh, the problem is work. Problem is the my boss. The problem is the company. But ultimately, our our external reality reflects our internal world, doesn't it? So that in that sense, that immediately moves you out. When you realize that, it takes you out of the victim mentality, which basically is denying your true power, and puts you back in control when you realize that I am the generator of my reality. So basically, this work environment is just reflecting an aspect of me. If you're not happy in your work environment, then it's probably reflecting a trauma within you that needs to be is ready to be healed. The same as in relationships, like you talked about. If you're in an abusive relationship, then it probably reflects a trauma within you somewhere that is ready to be healed. And it's just basically like a mirror reflecting that trauma back to you. So it's a great point. And this is a journey that I went on. And if I think about how I ended up in a work environment that had no real fulfillment for me, no real purpose, I was just kind of going through the motions, really. I didn't even really realize that you could have purpose in work. I thought it was something you just did basically to earn a monthly paycheck, and that was that, really. Made the best of it. But the way that shifted for me was when I started healing myself, basically, and all of a sudden I started to realize, as I brought myself into place of relative balance within, and then it started coming to me these aspect of purpose. Oh, maybe I can bring this purpose that I feel on the inside, which basically for me, my purpose then was to heal myself. But how can I bring that into my work as well? And that sent me on a longer journey. But how I got in that situation, coming back to it, I feel was because I was living in this, as I said, above the neck, this head-based consciousness, which is basically the thinking mind's main motivation is survival. So I think that's how a lot of people end up in these working environments that are very much about the money, over fulfillment and passion and purpose. It's like, well, I could choose to become an artist, which is my real passion, but how am I going to survive? How am I going to earn the money? So I'm going to move more towards this job in corporate because the money's there, which is, as again, we're not throwing out the intellect entirely, but if you're only making decisions with the head instead of the heart, you could say, or the gut, then you're going to create a life that is very safe, is focused on survival, but there's not necessarily much in the way of passion and fulfillment. So it is a journey, ultimately bringing awareness out of the head, out of the intellect, and back into the felt sense, and making decisions that feel good, like you said, are a hell yes, right? Because the mind was always going to fight you whenever you try and do that, because it is always going to try and steer towards safety and survival. So what comes up for you around that then? How do we bring awareness then? If the key really is to bring awareness out of the head and below the neck into the body, what are some practices that can help us to do that in your experience?
Doing it in a safe environment, which, like you said, co-regulation. If you have people that are speaking the same language, if they've had experiences, either however they've had the experiences of being the observer, being the witness to their life as opposed to being enmeshed in it. I think like step one is learn that you're not your thoughts, learn that you're not your emotions,
Huge.
learn that you're not your feelings. If you're not there, we're going to have different conversations. If you have someone who is there and they're just not spending more than 0.01% of their time there, then it's literally going to the gym. It's practicing. It's what does that feel like today? It's where CBT comes from. Having the relationship I was in, my ex-wife was doing a lot of CBT type practices. Cognitive behavioral therapy. What can you touch, taste, smell, witness? Like those basic things. I know we're going a little bit into the therapy, but really, if you're above the neck all the time and you're living in that survival, it is kind of therapy in a way to get into the what is it like to trust below the neck. So what you're trying to do is not necessarily change yourself or find your passion or anything else. It's learning yourself. There's a very gentle thing about, people talk about failure as a learning opportunity. You're not a failed human. It's not that you're not enough. It's not that you're doing something
Mm.
wrong. It's that you have a part of yourself that is not expressed. And so how can you feel that? Which is why people go into, like sexual addictions and porn and all those other things, because they feed both the dopamine and they get you
Mm.
in touch with your feelings. Doom scrolling, again, is a feelings thing. All of these
Mm.
things are symptoms that you don't get enough time to really spend time below the neck and love your body. So even for me, as a very sensitive male growing up, everything that I built above the neck was to protect the heart. So I lived from the heart space. I wore it on my sleeve. I wore that as a badge of honor, right? I always did the right thing. High emotional IQ is what that drove me to go along with the IQ, which is we talk a lot about in business, right? Um, Talk about having a high emotional IQ. Where can we use our emotions? Where can we share from that place of humanity that seems to be missing in
Mm.
corporate? That's a patch on the solution. If we as a society want to change corporate, we have to do it from within. We have to
Mm.
build practices, and that's why I think meditations become so important, and bricks on the phone and turning those things off. It's giving yourself time to explore that part of you that uh, actually needs a paycheck to survive. And maybe there are some other ways, political and economic, to solve that problem. But I wouldn't sit around waiting for that. You get to do what works for you if you can find people to do it with. So I would say find a little bit more, make a decision today to live a little bit below the neck and see what that feels like. Find other people who are willing to do the same and co-regulate, sit with them, practice. What is it like? I mean, even if it's just like a 1 hour a day coffee club, or you don't have an hour a day, 15 minutes a day while you're on the phone. And instead of that podcast, connect with another human. Not necessarily need to say something, but to just be. What is it like to just be and not be performing all the time? Performing, brushing your teeth, putting stuff in your way so that you fix that habit. To-do lists. Like, look at your to-do list today and say, like, what things would make me happy if they just blew away?
Mm.
Like find inquiries, ways of checking in with getting away from the headspace, because you're not your thoughts, and the world will just
Mm.
keep you in the I am my thought. This
Yeah.
is my next thought. I am worthy because I had this thought. I am correct because I had this thought. I am valid because I had this thought. Uh, and then your emotions will be like, yeah, we're doing a good job up there. It's like, no, you're not living your full humanity, your mind, heart, and soul. You're not doing
Mm.
that triplet.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there. I
That
mean,
was the whole thing.
the core really is you are not your thoughts, which I always
Yeah.
say is like the first stage in awakening. Until that realization comes in, then really you live your life asleep. Although not like when you go to bed at night. We're talking about your unconscious basically, which means that you are. If you still believe you are your thoughts, you still believe that you are the voice in your head, then you will stay on the same track throughout your life. The same thoughts will just loop round and round and round. The same energy will remain, locked in your system, and you'll very much just go on a certain path throughout your life, and there'll be no way off it basically, because you are the thoughts. But like you said, as soon as you're able to, and in fact, thinking about it, probably 99% of the people that I worked with in corporate were that, and I was as well. But it took something pretty dramatic, as I think it often takes with people, a particular trauma in my own life around the age of 32, for me to get
It
me off
spoke
that
the
hamster
Wi-Fi
wheel.
into existence.
For me, it was like, yeah, that's it. It took a pretty dramatic change of events for me to shift that from that mode of confidence, and I had consciousness. And it took a trauma, where everything kind of fell apart. And I think often that is the way for people, where they have to almost hit a wall to look at to change.
Yeah, to get out of the head.
Um,
Yeah.
exactly. And it seems to be. I wonder. It almost seems like this life is. I'm always kind of asking this: is life kind of designed in this way so that we get lost and then we have to find ourselves again. It seems to be the way, but for many people, they don't actually, and that's fine. It's not up to us to wake anybody up, but at a certain point, I think we all wake up, whether it's in this lifetime or the next one or in the next 100 lifetimes, we're all going to be waking up because the universe as a whole is waking up. But that first point, yeah, go on, Dan.
I will probably butcher this, but to that point, I heard someone say that until we introduced clocks and time, no one had a feel for how far away they were from anything, because in a distant sense. So they didn't know that they were 3 miles away from the next farm over. They just knew that it took a day to get there by cow. They just thought it was a day away. They just measured in, like, can I get this done today? But then when clocks came about, we're doing everything on the clock in 15, 30-minute increments. Can I get this done on time? There's a lot of micro valuations of self in that, and self-worth, as opposed to the old days before they had clocks. So until you're aware, you're not aware.
That's it. You think you are, but you're not. I think about myself up to the age of 32, and how I even got to that point in my life, I don't know. Just completely lost in my own trauma and conditioning, like most people are. But like I said, we all wake up at a perfect time.
Is that a gift or a curse, right? Like, do you see it as an opportunity or a prison?
Yeah.
I mean, even basic thoughts like that, like the thoughts will just that thought train will just keep rolling and rolling and rolling exactly the way it's rolling until you notice it and step away from it and decide, there's another thought train I can join. And what's doing the choosing? Once you get out of that survival and instincts, it's the intuition. It's the heart. You bring the heart online. You bring the gut online. You start deciding from a different place. And until you're in a survival, like until you've hit the wall. I mean, you and I apparently have hit some of the same walls. I hit more of a personal wall. Maybe you hit more of a professional wall. But the thing was the same, this never-ending cycle of whether it was wrongness or incompatibility or whatever that caused you to more give up than surrender.
Well, I had no choice. That's for sure. My inner world was in such chaos because I experienced more of a psychological trauma around that time, that I had no choice because my mind was just not functioning at all. So I had to find another way. My mind just became such a chaotic mix of different voices. Some I felt were mine, some weren't. So it became very clear to me, I've got to do something if I'm going to get through this. And that led me on a path towards the Western psychology, which didn't really help me, and onto Buddhism and shamanism. But yeah, when you look back now, you can see that it was the universe basically saying, time to wake up. You got no choice at this point. It's not like, well, I might meditate for 10 minutes this morning, but I've got other things to do. It was like, no, you've got to, and you've got to heal yourself quick, or you're not going to make it through this. So it very much was wake up or exit for me. So, it's there was no choice for me in the matter. But if somebody's listening to this now and they're kind of having that inkling, then meditation is a great place to start. But you touched on something which was really interesting, actually, which is support on the journey. Because when I work with people and they haven't done a great deal of that inner work, often it's almost numb from the neck down. They can't really feel anything in the body. It's like, okay, can you bring awareness to the feet, the hands, the center channel? There's nothing happening. And I think that's because they've been so locked out of the body for so long. They've been in their heads, they're living in their minds for so long, and it's been successful up to a certain point, perhaps in a work environment, and they realize that they want to go deeper, they need to heal, and so they're looking for something else. But that's why support is so important, to have somebody with you to hold the space, which basically means just providing an energy of support for you to start reconnecting with the body. And it might take months. In some cases, it does take months for people to, oh yeah, I can actually feel a little something in my solar plexus or tightening in the center of my chest. And that's a start of the healing process. This healing is basically very simple. It's just surrendering to the present moment and just feeling into the uncomfortable sensations in the body. Usually down the middle of the body, there's the line of energy centers. And in those energy centers tends to be where our traumas are stored. And it might be a tightening in the stomach, it might be a pinching in the heart, or wherever it might be. But there's these little, some are big traumas, some are more micro traumas. Just feeling into them gently, no expectations, not trying to make anything happen, not trying to understand anything. That's easier said than done, because the mind is always wants to try and understand. It's always taking us out of the present moment to think about what we're doing tomorrow or what happened yesterday. And without support, in other words, somebody who's done this, a lot of this work over time to hold space for you, the mind will generally win. You try and sit for 10 minutes on your own, the mind will take you constantly out all over the place. There's very little stillness where healing can take place. But if you've got somebody who's providing that support, it's like the system can suddenly feel safe. It can relax, and long enough for the mind to come to a place of stillness, and then the healing to naturally take place. The body's always trying to bring itself back into balance, because we're always doing and thinking, there's not enough stillness for that to take place. And so, healing, rebalancing will naturally take place when we bring mind and body to rest. And I found support every day. Connecting with my community is how I do that. I guess you would say the same, Dan, your own experience.
Yeah, feeling back into when I first had that not my thoughts exploration, it was, okay, I'm not my thoughts, and feeling below the body requires me to do something. So I'd go right back into the head, and I would try to be like, oh, I'm doing it wrong.
Yes.
I can't feel my heart because my heart's broken. I can't feel my gut because I've never trusted it before. I can't feel and I'm not suggesting those are actual answers. I'm actually, kind of saying the opposite. It's your mind tries to make up stories, and you realize that it's, your mind is the bard.
Yeah.
It's just, strumming along, playing along. This is what you're doing today. But the maestro and everybody else is down below the neck. And we focus on like finding the heart, finding the gut on the inside. One I've been playing with, I just throw this out there go a little woo for a second, is, the skin's the largest organ in the body. You don't say like feel into the skin. You might say notice your hand or notice your feet. But in totality of your being, if you feel into your skin, your outer surface, there's a lot of sensation there. So if you're in a constant state of overwhelm and you can't feel your heart space, it might be because, there's too much energy there for you to feel. It's an overwhelm thing. Or the gut, the same thing. You can find your skin, there's a lot more other sensation there. You could feel the air, you could feel temperature. Your hand might feel a little bit different than your other hand. Your foot might feel different from and not noticing a particular thing in micro focusing, but if you macro notice, I've found, even after doing this work for a couple of years, it just dawned on me, hey, the skin's an organ. Why don't I sit with my skin? And then I started noticing this ability to zoom in and zoom out and find spaciousness. And I like how our mentors would say, somehow, some way. That somehow, some way doesn't have to happen the first day you think, I'm not my thoughts, I'm healed, or I can be healed, I have to do all this work. It's like, no, the journey is going to depend on how much trauma you have stored in your body.
Yes.
And it's going to come out when it feels safe to come out. So if you just cultivate safety, and literally the phrase, if I don't feel safe in my own skin, that comes up a lot. You may not. You may not have landed here in a way that you can work on this world. A lot of people who have that 5 personality patterns leaving pattern,
me included,
fall into that category where it doesn't matter what this world does to them or whether they think of their own thoughts or not. They're not present in their own skin. They're not living in the body. And I have a much greater empathy for, imagine being 40 years or so on the planet and not felt for the first time what it feels like to be embodied. You just hear these words and you're like, well, what is that? Who? So, small sips, like our mentors say, little bits at a time. Those are all, and inquiries over answers, I think, is the best way to get out of the mind. If you pose a question, well, who's answering the question. Why am I asking myself a question? Aha, you can think about the question and the answer separately. Well, you must not be your own thoughts. Like really
Mm.
holding an inquiry. And where are you holding it? Am I holding it up here? Okay, it's fine. In the headspace is great. Well, we got a lot of parts that live up there. How does your heart feel about walking into the room? How does your gut feel? You feel scared. You feel fear. Now you've got sensations in the gut. Why do I feel fear? Doesn't matter. Can I just accept it? So
Mm.
little things like that, little micro curiosities, I guess, during the day would be how I would advise anyone to start on this journey. Like I'm
Mm.
terrified of Aya or ayahuasca or doing, mushroom ceremonies or any of that. I've stayed very much in the safety of my, you know, the headspace that I cultivated with my, master's degree and, this, that, and the other thing and studies of math and blah blah blah. 30 years in corporate IT. There's a lot going on above the neck. There's also a lot of heart space, and there's a distance between my passionate love of self and all the stuff that I've done in my life. That's not a midlife crisis definition. It's just there's a distance there. And can you love both? Can you hold both? Can you nurture both? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you
So
hold a
true.
very good space for me to find my channel. So I've gone off on a couple of deep ends already. I appreciate it.
Well, that's the thing. Like we said something earlier in the podcast, which was it's about reps, right? I love that because it is. It's not like you will have. I'm not saying that nobody has this, but like this spectacular awakening one day. I am not. I am loving awareness, and all of a sudden I know that I'm connected to everything. I'm awakened. Which some gurus might have, but for the rest of us, it is a just a daily process of like going to the gym. And every time you get pulled out into the mind, you come back to the present moment. That might be the breath, it might be the sensations in the body, it might be a mantra, whatever it might be. And of course, the mind takes you out again for 10 minutes, and you realize you come back to the present moment. Then it takes you out for 5 minutes, you come back to the present moment. But the more you practice, the more you strengthen that muscle of coming back to the present moment. And then what I found was that it naturally starts to then happen in daily life. So it's not just in meditation where you remember to come back to the present moment, which basically means remember who you are. You get lost in a part, which means that basically something that you're not, which is basically a trauma from the past. And then you naturally, because you're doing the practices, you remember to come back to who you are, the present moment. And what I find then is that just naturally starts to spill out into your everyday life. So you're busy working away, you're caught up in a part. Oh no, I've got 10 minutes to get this thing out, and everyone's emailing me, but all of a sudden there's this remembrance, come back to who you are. And it's like I just come back to the body. Okay, what's happening in my body right now? There is this feeling, this stress feeling building up my body. Let me take a moment to feel through it, back in the present moment. And then when I feel like I'm more of an integrated place, let me take action from that place. And so no matter where I am in my life, I might get, you're still always going to get caught up in thought and parts, etc. But I'm less lost, than I used to be. It might be lost for 10 minutes. So I remember to come back to the present moment. And I get lost again in thought 5 minutes, come back to the present moment. So you just kind of like a dripping tap is the old way that the Buddhists describe it. It's like this drop of awareness. Eventually the drops become more and more regular, more and more frequent. It's like drop, drop, drop. So there's less time in between where you get lost in something that you're not. And then eventually, I suppose, when you're a real enlightened master, it becomes more of a stream, and you've got this constant awareness and you can bring the meditative state into any situation. So even if you're in a corporate environment where you're not happy and fulfilled, still you've got that awareness. And something that I realized eventually as I kind of transitioned away from that world is I'm just thinking about somebody in the position I was 6 years ago. If you're in a place where you just feel like you're desperate to get out of a particular role, you just hate your job and you hate your management and you hate everything about it, that mindset is very draining. It actually drains your energy if you're desperate to get away from something like that. If you can find some gratitude for it, whatever it is, maybe there's some people there that you like, gratitude for the money that it brings you. This is what I went through. I'm grateful for the money it gives me, because that enables me to invest in my own healing and my development outside of work. I'm grateful for these people I interact with that I do really get along with. And so for as long as you're in that environment, if you can bring gratitude for it, it becomes the environment becomes more of something that energizes you rather than depletes you. And that I think is really important. Whatever situation you're in, even if you're not going to be in it forever, but can you at least find gratitude for it so that it actually provides you with energy rather than depleting you at the end of each day? And of course, over time, as you're working on yourself, investing in yourself, you can find your way away from that environment and maybe build something for yourself. Maybe it's a new career, maybe it's a business. But certainly, I think it's important to at least be accepting of where you're at rather than, getting into that kind of that blaming victim mentality.
Yeah, gratitude is a really important practice. I think being clear on who you are and had gone that self-love journey, receiving gratitude, I think, being able to receive gratitude comes before actually, like, look. And when you look for gratitude, you find thankfulness. They're not quite the same thing. And again, like we're talking about instinct versus intuition, when you're first learning to take those micro sips at the gym of awareness, you are forcing and managing a little bit. You're managing your circumstance, and you can repattern in that management. Even when you're in the stream, the thin stream of awareness that you described, you can continue the patterns by managing. Okay, my result is better. I feel better about that. Where you can make the shift is more instead of the fight, flight, freeze, fawn of managing and controlling and making your instincts better so that you move and flow a little bit easier. If you can drop into intuitive inquiry, that's where you start. Instead of being thankful for getting the money and thankful for doing and thankful for creating, you'd be more open to receive. So if you hold an open inquiry, you're able to receive the gratitude that, by the way, is already there. So it's not that you're not noticing it. There's just light, love, gratitude, it's all there to be noticed. So what you're noticing is what you're used to noticing, your homeostasis about how you live your life in stress and overwhelm and, fight or flight survival, which ties into your, you build instincts and you live a life, and then you get to be 60 or 70 and you go, I have just managed my life beautifully. But you go out and see a sunset and you're like, oh, I just lived today for the first time. This is how people have those experiences. So you can learn from others and say, I wonder what it would be like to, hold an inquiry. Like, can I enjoy the sunset without noticing the colors, or like evaluating it? Wow, this is the prettiest sunset I've ever seen. Again, that's like a performative thing. Can you just sit in presence? And that is reps and practice. And where you set your intention and what you attune to determines what you're going to receive. So people talk about, I have to give more to get more. I think to get more is just opening yourself up to receiving more, and it's safety. Safety is the thing that allows you to open up to receive the abundance that's already there for you. It's like total woo. If you had asked me 5 years if those words would have come out in sequence in my mouth, I would have laughed. I would have totally laughed. But I'm a different person because I allowed the drips to turn into the stream, to turn into a waterfall, to now I'm swimming in it. Like I swim in awareness. It's
learning to receive. That's massive. Like to relinquish
really
control. For some people, I'm just thinking of my wife because she struggles with this. To relinquish control of life, to think that you can actually surrender to what is. And I know we're kind of like,
not safe.
You do need to have a certain amount of control over what you're doing in life, but ultimately, like you said, a lot of abundance really is the ability to come in, just surrender to what is, and just open up and allow whoever wants to come through to come to you. Otherwise, if you're constantly doing, constantly thinking, it's like you're pushing that stuff away, because you're just kind of locked in, your system's tense, nothing can come through to you. But learning to surrender, to let go, as we do in minis, is just about, okay, what wants to come through to me. And sometimes I get the feeling like it's a lot of information that I don't even understand. Energies, upgrades are coming through my system. I'm not actually thinking about that. I want this to come to me. It's just by a process of surrender, this stuff can just come to me when it wants to. And so it is that balance, the doing and the being. Um, it's a co-creation really between you could say the small self and the higher self, whatever words you want to use for that. But that I think is a human being in balance anyway, if you can combine those two worlds. But I would say to start off with, this is why my program is designed like this. The first part of my Pathway to Purpose program is all about what I call inner purpose. So it is this raising awareness, it's healing, it's clearing the energy from the past, all that past conditioning, to make space for something new, because most people are just full up with all their trauma and conditioning and just operating. There's no space for anything new to come into the system because they're just totally full up. So first of all, you've got to create space by processing that stuff, create a little bit of space, and then perhaps something new can come through. Like for me, it was this purpose, how I can serve others in this lifetime, whatever else it might be, any other intuitions, any other upgrades can come through to you as a person because you've made some space for it. So I think it's really important to start with that self-inquiry, the awareness, the healing, the emotional processing, so you can create space for something new to come into your system. Beautiful, Dan. Any closing thoughts today? Anywhere you'd like to direct people?
Resentment has been huge in my field, and I look at it as the continental divide between love and hate. If you notice what you're resentful to, and not, manage the anger or the fear or, your desires, like the things you're passionate for, try to move towards them. If you just sit with what you resent in your life and notice that there are two sides of that coin, that's been, especially in this environment where the pendulum is swinging so far between the left and the right and people's viewpoints and all of that's, we're challenging, fire this person, don't fire that person, this is just, that is just, valid but true, valid but false, like, consistency, not just high emotional, just we're in this muck as a society. And if you want a timeout, it's not so much turn it off, although that helps, Paul. It helps. But as you're watching your doom scroll, notice what you resent. Because what resents presents, right? We talk about what resists persists. But yes, for me, the new one is what you resent presents. The opportunity that you have, not to say that watching the news is an opportunity for healing, but it kind of is. What your resentments, your deep inner resentments inside that you have, your bias, what you think is normal, what you think is your value system, it's very much tied to when you receive something, there's an initial resentment. It's like, I think that's more an intuitive play. Your intuition is that you should land towards love, and you're not. And so the intuition gives you the both and. The instinct comes in to provide safety. So, you watch and you hear somebody, something bad happen to someone, and you're like, you could resent either side of that. How that happened to the person, or the person, whichever you want to associate your inner victim, because we all have one, or your ego to, it'll run to that. If you can somehow get to what you're resenting, then you can see what's presenting itself as an opportunity to shift yourself towards love or hate. You're making the choice at that point. The situation is just information. It's just highlighting that for you. So if you want to control your triggers, you watch your resentment. That's what's come up for me a lot over and over again lately.
Interesting. Yeah, as you said, doom scrolling, watching the news, it is going to trigger you.
You're feeding yourself a narrative too, right? Like you're feeding yourself what you want to see, and algorithms are great at that. If you click on this thing and that thing and go over here, it's going to keep feeding you that, and it's going to keep you stuck. So, I mean,
It's
you
very
just,
seductive, that world, that fear, that resentment, like you say. It pulls us in, which can be useful. I mean, if you want to do shadow work, I always say just
uh-huh,
watch the news.
watch
Watch
that.
the news. That'll
Exactly.
bring the stuff up to the surface. But if you don't know how to then process that stuff, then you get stuck in it. You get stuck
Yeah.
in that world, and you're just kind of like feeding on it, and these darker energies. Depends on what you believe in, but certainly it will just fill you up with more of that hateful energy or fearful energy or whatever it might be. But if you want to if you're interested in exploring where your biases are and your traumas are, watch the news and you'll it'll come up, and then
Yeah.
it's up to you what you want to do with that. But
Don't do it if you're not resourced.
you have to be resourced. Yeah, you have to be
Don't get
resourced.
resourced and then watch the news. You'll find you turn it off much faster.
Yeah, I don't watch it now anyway. But I know what you mean. It's very easy to get sucked into. All right then. Anyway, you'd like to point people to, Dan? I can drop your LinkedIn underneath in the comments.
Yeah, that would be great. Reach out to me on LinkedIn would be good. I'm also on Threads. I'm Dan Blackman, IT Dan Blackman on LinkedIn. I'm Dan Blackman on most of the other socials. And starting a school. I will be so DM me on any of those platforms, and I'll give you the details. And I'm starting from scratch, so there's always perks and freebies when you're first starting.
There you go. There you go. You might get some money off to work with Dan if they resonate with his message. Beautiful podcast. Beautiful energy shared as always, Dan. Thank you so much. And as always, you can check out the buddhaspot.com, my free purpose alignment assessment. So you can see where you are right now in terms of your alignment to your own purpose and get actionable next steps for deeper alignment if you'd like to explore that for yourself. But there's so much we could go on all day, I'm sure, but let's leave it there because we want to save stuff for future podcasts. And thanks so much for joining, Dan, and let's do this again soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark. Appreciate you.
Thanks, brother. Bye for now.